Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's event, Social Media is a Record, How Juneau, Alaska Protects Transparency with Automated Archiving. My name's Morgan Wright. I'm a Senior Fellow here for Government Technology. And, folks, we're going to have fun today. Just want to say thank you for joining us. We're going to have fun over the next 60 minutes. Now, before we begin, just a couple of brief housekeeping notes. A recording of this presentation will be emailed to everybody within 48 hours. So if you're worried about it or you have to miss some of it, don't worry, folks. A link will come out to you. Use it for your reference, and more importantly, pass it along to your colleagues, the ones who couldn't attend today. Now, this webcast is interactive, and you can participate in the Q&A below anytime. You'll see a Q&A box along the bottom left of your presentation panel. Just hit it, send in your questions, and towards the end, I'll gather those up, and we will make sure we ask Anil and Lori today. Now, our speakers will get to as many as we can, and at the close of our webinar today, you can download a PDF of the slides. There's a webinar resources widget also at the bottom of the console. And also make sure that if you connect over Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, you use the hashtag GovTechLive and let people know that you're on. So at the close of the webinar, there will be a survey. Folks, we encourage you to fill out the survey for us. We have made improvements. We've brought new material because of the response that we've gotten back from you, our customers and our listeners here today. So please make sure you do that. It'll launch at the end. If you leave early, just click the survey widget, and it'll pop up, and you can complete it. Now, if you have any media issues or any other technical issues, our crack staff with a name definitely made for Alaska named Jeremiah from On24 will be here, so put your questions in the chat box there, and he'll make sure that he gets that to you. So now the more important thing is let's get to today's event. So what we're going to be talking about is we've got two speakers with us today. Lori Sika, she's the municipal clerk of Juneau, Alaska, and Anil Chawla, he's the founder and CEO of ArchiveSocial. But before we get to those, I'm just going to do a quick presentation. We're going to go through my presentation. We're going to get to Lori, who's going to talk about social media as a record, automated archiving. Anil will cover the legal aspects of social media use, and then we'll do live Q&A. But real quickly, let's just kind of do an overview real quick. So let's talk about social media by the numbers. And so what we want to talk about, there are three numbers here that are important to social media, obviously. So what's the first thing we want to talk about? Well, the first thing actually goes back to the Constitution. So it's the First Amendment. This is probably one of the most tricky and most important things that you will deal with in terms of your use and monitoring and working with social media. It's always been the issue of freedom of speech. How much free speech do people do? Can you monitor it? Can you delete comments? Can you manage it and moderate it? So we're going to find that out during today's seminar. Now, the second thing is there's two things here then to the second thing we want to talk about when we say social media by the numbers. So the first one is transparency. One of the surveys that we do every 2 years with the Center for Digital Government and with Government Technologies, we talk to states, we survey them, we find out what are some of the key drivers for you. Without a doubt, there are two issues that always come up, and this is how social media plays a part. The first one is transparency. People want to see how government works. They want to know that their concerns are being heard. They want to see the process of government to make sure it's open and transparent, not only for accountability, but so they can participate in the process. The second thing is the accountability. They want accountability. This is one way for people to be held accountable for the actions they take and for the citizenry to be engaged and be an active part of this discussion. And the third one is actually anytime you talk about deploying new technology, I'd like to put it into a kind of a framework of things where I talk about the first thing you have to have is you have to have policy. If you don't have policy, if you don't know what you want to do, then any solution will get you there. If you don't know where you're going, then any road will take you there. So the first thing you got to do is be very clear from a policy standpoint. What is it we want? Once you give the policy, then it comes to the training. You can see training dog right there. It's not just one thing. Think about driving a car. It's not just enough to sit down and be given the rules of the road, but you also have to train people. This is how you drive. This is how you make turns. This is how you brake. So you also have to do the training. And then and only then do you get access to the fun stuff like the F-117 stealth fighter there. Folks, I promise you, I have friends in the military. I don't know if anybody who flies a stealth fighter, but I can promise you that they spend lots of time in the classroom going over policy, then they're in the simulators before they ever get to the technology. And in case you are on social media, I can tell you folks, this is not how you're doing Facebook. If you're doing it this way, you are definitely doing it wrong. So let's start off by, let me introduce you to Lori Sika. She's the municipal clerk of Juneau, Alaska. Now, before I read her bio to you, we have our first poll question today. We've got two poll questions, one with Lori and one with Anil. So let's go to this first poll question, and then I'll introduce the rest of Lori's bio to you. So first of all, what is your opinion on social media as a public record? Do you think it's definitely a public record by law? Do you think it might be a record, but your activity is not worth retaining? Do you feel strongly it is not a public record, or you don't know? So it's definitely a record, might be a record, but the activity is not worth retaining. You feel strongly it's not a public record, or you don't know. Now I get the privilege and the honor of introducing Lori Sika to you. Now, Lori was born and raised in Tacoma, Washington, but she arrived in Skagway, Alaska in 1981. She's been married since '83, has a daughter, and while living in Skagway, Lori worked a variety of jobs. She found her career when she was hired by the City of Skagway Clerk's Office, where she worked accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, filing, tax collection, assessments, ordinance drafting, minutes, and public relations. Folks, you can see we have a great variety of background here for her to talk to you today. Now, in '95, they moved to Juneau, her and her family, and after a year of working with Montgomery Watson Engineering, it's also known as Carson Dorn for you folks up in the area, she was hired by the city and borough of Juneau to be the environmental and zoning inspector. She learned all the streets in Juneau while enforcing the litter and zoning codes and met many interesting residents, and in 2000, she joined the deputy clerk, Beth McEwen, in the clerk's office and served as a municipal clerk since that time. She's also the immediate past president of the Alaska Association of Municipal Clerks, which she just stepped down after serving 1 year from 2015 to 16, so congratulations on that as well, Lori. Now let's take a look at the results here real quick. So 77% of the folks who responded say, hey, it's definitely a public record by law. 16% of you said it might be a record but not worth retaining. Nobody said that they didn't feel it was a public record, and about 5% of you said you don't know. So, Lori, that's actually a pretty good start. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you, and here you go.
Well, thank you very much, Morgan. I'm very happy to be here today to talk to you about social media. Thank you for the introduction. This is a picture of Juneau on a sunny day in the summer. Our city hall is on the left there. We're across from Marine Park and the Gastineau Channel. Mount Juneau's in the back, and right now it's 30 degrees and we're having a little bit of snow. And I want to let people know that I am definitely not a social media expert. I am 56 years old, and I started working using a Selectric typewriter, and when computers first came out, our office shared a Lisa computer. So I've been learning about social media enough to keep up with my daughter, and since about 2008. And things change, it seems like, every day. CBJ has been very cautious about establishing social media and not cautious. Actually, this is our experience. The horse was out of the barn. We had police department and fire department both set up a Facebook page before we had any social media policy in place. Our management was a little concerned about that. Had a lot of questions about it, so they put a halt to any further social media use until we established our policy. And that policy took us about 2 years to write because, we were trying to figure out what all the implications were. Our concerns were mainly about record keeping and management of the site. And questions about, does social media need to be a record that is managed? The Alaska Public Records Act says that an electronic record means information that is recorded in a machine-readable form. Local record, that's us. And records are records regardless of their physical form characteristic, developed and received under law in connection with the transaction of official business, preserved or appropriate for preservation, etc., etc. The key is a record is a record, no matter what format it's in. In 2014, we established our social media policy. Highlights of that are that all sites established need to be approved by the city manager, and we have a very spread out city. We don't have one building. We have departments in many buildings around town. We have departments doing their own things and have their sites set up and approved, but they're on their own. The information published on our social media sites needs to be on our websites, and we are trying to push people to our website for more information. The departments are all responsible for their content, for managing their sites on their own, and our policy states that social media information is subject to State of Alaska public record. Policy goes on to say that any content maintained on a social media format that is related to city business, including a list of subscribers, posted communication, is a public record, and whenever possible, our sites shall clearly indicate that any articles or other content posted or submitted for posting are subject to public disclosure. So you can see that we've tried to let people know that the comments that they make on our Facebook pages, etc., are public. It seems obvious, but we need to put a disclaimer on that tells them how they should behave on our site and when we would take their comments down. So on the CBJ Facebook page, our main organizational page, we put that information in the About section. And you can see on the police department's page, they're putting their information up on their home page. It's pinned to the top as a post, and it stays there so people can see that. Our social media policy goes on to say that departments are responsible to maintain their content in accessible format so it can be produced in response to an information request. That they should download the records no less frequently than quarterly to a CBJ file server, and that the use of social media platforms that lack archival function is not recommended. So we have several departments using social media sites, and when you talked about training and how it's important to get people to know how to manage their information, a lot of times I'm not sure that they're going to take the time to download that information and keep it up to date in case there is a public records request. So that's why we've gone to using ArchiveSocial to help us manage our information. And it has really a simple way to do that. Records management really is all about risk management, and whether you think that this information on social media is a record or not, you have to determine how much risk you're willing to take. With this social media archiving, it really does make it pretty simple. This is a picture of what I see when I log into our ArchiveSocial page, our administrator page. You can also see all of the people who have social media sites that are maintained by CBJ. And I can see their accounts in real time. And in response to a records request, you can do a search. You can do an advanced search. The search function is very flexible. And, in this political time, I thought we should look for a little kindness. So I put in the search word kindness. And I came up with several hits on the word kindness. And that's probably because the City and Borough of Juneau Police Department has established that 2017 is going to be a year of kindness. And this is a social media program that they're pushing out there to community. They're doing a lot of events around kindness and trying to promote good behavior. Excuse me, this is just a up of that. This is just a screenshot of a press release that we've done, and this is our typical press release. And you'll see that in the press release they have a reference to the photos will be posted to Facebook, which is a really good use of Facebook. This is the information release that we put out looking for. JPD was doing a search for people who had committed a crime. Put the pictures up on Facebook. And now when we're talking about two-way communication and capturing this kind of information flow, this is a good example of where we would definitely want to keep that information in an archive. And on a happier note, JPD has been finding Facebook very useful for their business. We had a missing young man in town, and we put out an all-points bulletin with a picture on Facebook, and had a very happy ending in that case. And this really engages our community and gets people talking. That talk is captured in our social media archive. So those are just a few examples of what we're doing with our social media and why we want to keep it archived. So I'll give it back to you, Morgan.
Hey, Lori, great stuff. Actually, I love that kind of stuff. Having spent 18 years in state and local law enforcement, actually, we were talking earlier, a friend of mine from the Kansas Highway Patrol went to the Alaska State Troopers, unfortunately died in an aircraft accident, but the use of Facebook and social media for engagement, especially in remote areas, is absolutely critical. So that's great work. And, hey, appreciate this. And what we're going to do now, folks, is that I get to introduce the next speaker to you. Now, Lori's going to stick around. Keep your Q&A coming in. We're going to handle the questions at the end. So what I'm going to do now is let me introduce Anil Chawla to you. Now, he's the founder and CEO of ArchiveSocial. It's the public sector's leading provider of technology to help government agencies manage and archive risk. Now, before I finish reading the rest of Anil's bio, let's go to our last poll question here today and find out how your agency is currently retaining records of social media. Now, are you not retaining records and rely on the networks, which means you rely on Twitter, on Facebook, on whatever the provider might be, YouTube? You take manual captures, screenshots, copy and paste. I mean, the real tough way, but are you doing manual capture? Do you use a personal backup tool, something like a Backupify or SocialSafe, something along those lines? Do you use an automated solution for archiving, or are you already a happy ArchiveSocial customer? So you're not retaining records and you rely on the networks. You take manual captures. You use a personal backup tool. You have an automated solution for archiving, or you're already a happy ArchiveSocial customer. So they say, let's go to the scorecard. 50% of you say that you are not retaining your records and rely on the networks. And thankfully, 50% of you on the call today say you're already a happy ArchiveSocial customer. Anil, that has to make it at least easy for you to kick this off. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Morgan, I do love it when it's black and white like that. So thank you for all of you who are a customer showing up today to learn about how Juneau is approaching this issue and taking the time to continue to keep up to speed with the changes in this environment. I also want to thank you, Morgan, for the intro, and especially want to thank Lori for your participation here today. I know it's early in the morning, and I appreciate you dialing in and sharing how you've approached this issue around social media being an important record in Alaska. And I also like the look at the archive, looking at some more positive keywords there, so I appreciate you sharing that perspective. So for all of you who have tuned in, one of the key issues that came out in that initial poll about social media being a public record, I think about 15% of you highlighted that it's probably a record by definition, but you're not sure if what you're doing on social media constitutes a record. And so what I'd like to do here today is deep dive into that key question of, even if the law spells it out as a record, what does it mean in reality? When does your social media content constitute a record? What are those legal risks, and how can you get ahead of them? And so we have a number of real-life examples and case studies to cover. And for the 50% of you who are currently relying on the social networks to have the data, that's not an unreasonable thing to do, given that you hope that Facebook and Twitter and these other sites will keep the data. But we will look at, again, the reality there where they may have the data today, but it might not be there for you tomorrow. And so I will spend some time in this presentation talking about how you can approach social media archiving and give you some high-level tips. Now, again, in full disclosure, as you heard from Lori, ArchiveSocial does provide a social media archiving solution, as you can tell from our name, but we're not the only option out there. And so again, my intention in this presentation is to give you more of a high-level view of what it means to archive social media, what the challenges are, and what the best practices are. So again, as you have questions, please use that Q&A window, and we'll be happy to address them at the end. So I won't spend a whole lot of time on this next section because Lori did a great job actually covering more of the information than I am about social media constituting a public record. But the key phrase again in there is regardless of physical form. And we went ahead and grabbed a public records law, not from Alaska, Lori was going to cover that, but just to show you that across the country, this is an important issue. So very similar to as we saw in the Alaska records law, Washington has a Public Records Act. Much of the same language, regardless of physical form, and that's really the key phrase. Because these laws were written a long time ago, before there was email, before, of course, there was social media, but they were written in a very forward-thinking, medium-agnostic format. And the example here is if you were to receive a crime tip. A crime tip is a crime tip, whether you get that on a piece of paper, in an email, or in a direct message. And so it's really that nature of that content that matters, that defines it as a record. And again, this is a reason why across the country, while these laws have been in place for a long time, with the advent of social media and the importance of it in public sector, it's become clear across the country for agencies that when there's content worth keeping, whether it's, again, on social or anywhere else, it's the content that defines the record. And so you need to archive your email, you need to archive your social, and so forth. Now, let's get back to that first poll where the poll really brought up this question of what are we doing on social media that actually constitutes a record? Because if it is the nature of the content and most of what we're posting is a repeat of what we've already said, or it's friendly chatter, then it's probably not a record. Well, that is true, but more and more as we look at agencies across the country, and I encourage you to inspect your own presence. If you're actually engaged on social media, it is almost certain that within the day, or if not that day, the week, you're going to create records of critical importance. And so I'll give you some examples here. And these are some major news items that you're probably familiar with, but we'll also dive into some case studies that you probably haven't read about in the news. So to start with, the clearest example of when social media is generating records comes from emergency management. And I have the tweet up here from Orlando Police. This was obviously a horrific incident this past year, the worst mass shooting in the history of the United States. But the silver lining for the purpose of this conversation is how important social media was and how helpful it was in the time of crisis. In fact, in the middle of the night when the shooting erupted, the Orlando police was very smart to get on their Twitter feed and immediately post, we're going to provide all updates over Twitter. Don't email or call us, please, because that could be overwhelming. And then they proceeded to provide transparent, frequent updates over social media. So in the middle of an emergency or disasters, we've seen time and time again, whether a shooting or a natural disaster or anything else, social media provides the most effective means of getting information out. But it's also a critical situation, it's critical information, and therefore we're generating records. Moving along here, another example comes from not a crisis in the real world, but a crisis that actually was created by social media. In fact, the city of South Daytona dealt with this last year, where a photo posted online that tagged that location tagged the city was quite offensive. It had a dog with its mouth duct taped, and this went viral. And it turned out the person that posted it, who had location tagged the city of South Daytona, was not even in that city, but the city got the brunt of the response on social media. Initially, a lot of criticism about animal cruelty, asking what the city was doing about it. And what the city did was they used social media to address the situation, inform the public, let people know that they were looking into it, working with law enforcement around the country. They ultimately located the offender in North Carolina, and used social media really to change that public perception. But in the process, they generated more than 20,000 comments in a few days. And this is a town that really doesn't have a whole lot happening on their social media usually. And they actually received records requests from the national media asking for those comments and much of the information that they shared. So again, in a time of crisis where it has a lot of attention, it certainly generates records. And then I want to take this to, it doesn't have to be a major news item. Here in the city of Durham, where I'm located and ArchiveSocial is headquartered, we had a situation where 911 became unavailable to a small segment of the citizens here. And the city did what they could to let people know by using social media that 911 was not available, that they should use text or at least a landline if they're Verizon customers. So again, a critical situation communicated over social media. Now, all of these are public safety type situations, so I don't want to overlook the actual area where the majority of records actually get created day to day, and that is in the act of servicing the citizens. In fact, public agencies, if you think about it, as we all know in government, exist to serve the citizens. And so day in and day out, if you are active on social media, you are communicating information to your citizens, you're clarifying, you're receiving questions, responding, and that is serving the citizens. And so day in and day out, the opportunity to create records exists, and important information is communicated back and forth. And so again, we want to think about all that as potential record. Now, if you could follow that and look at your presence and see examples of that, your next question might be, okay, well, it looks like we may be creating records. Not everything we post is a record. We certainly are creating records. But why do I need to maintain them, and who's asking for them? And it turns out that over the past few years, we've seen a real uptick in the number of public records requests for social media content. I actually have a tweet on the screen that's a clear example of that from 2014, where the tweet literally requests the Twitter feeds and it says, consider this a Public Records Act request. Now, more often than not, what we're seeing with the agencies that we work with is that the records request isn't specifically for social media, but it very much includes social media, and oftentimes social media is the most important aspect. So if you look at the second box on the bottom here, when there are public records requests, we often see these key phrases: any and all documents that relate to, all notifications of. So again, in a weather event or there's a parade, you might issue additional notifications over social media, all notifications of the street closure, all emails and communications. And so we see this language quite often, and because social media has become so important to the day-to-day happenings in a city, a county, or agency, when this request comes in, really social media should be a part of it, and that's what a lot of the agencies we work with are realizing. So that hopefully provides a high level of how the social media content that transpires on most pages can generate records. I want to switch gears now and talk about a few situations that, again, you may not have read about in the news, where social media was requested, and because an agency put the effort in to get an archive in place, and they were proactive, and they made that small investment up front, it really paid off in a big way. And the key point here, again, is social media has so many benefits. Protecting your agency ensures that, one, you reduce costs and time if and when a situation occurs. But two, it also protects your ability to stay on social media and weather that storm. And what I'll start with is an example out of Central Texas. Last year, the state of Texas had the worst flooding ever recorded in the state, and a number of cities were affected. But San Marcos is a great example of a city that used social media to a very high degree of effectiveness during the flood. Now, in fact, they had this flood during Memorial Day, and they had an archive in place. And not only did the archive protect them after the flood in terms of records requests, because as we know, after emergencies, the public records requests tend to come in, but they also then used the archive to actually review their timeline. They actually reconstructed their timeline of how they communicated across social media. They reviewed the type of content that citizens were posting, the issues they were reporting, to figure out what was important. And that really paid off in a big way, because 6 months later, another flood struck the state of Texas, and they were that much more prepared. And so, again, having that archive in place protected really the most critical channel for communication during the floods, again, which were their Twitter and Facebook feeds. Now, going around the country here a little bit, if you look at California, we actually had a situation with the Santa Barbara PD who actually was not a customer of ArchiveSocial's initially, but our team had followed up with our contact there who knew that archiving was a good idea to do someday, never had an issue, and finally agreed to start a free trial. And just 3 weeks into the free trial, because the city had been planning a gun buyback event, which generated a lot of controversy as it's a controversial issue, the National Rifle Association actually issued a public information request that included all communications related to the gun buyback event. And because most of the communications had transpired on Facebook, the PD knew they had to produce that Facebook content. So luckily they had started that free trial. They were 3 weeks in, and they were able to simply produce the content without much effort. But if you read this case study, they talk about how had they not made that decision just in time to put an archive in place, an archiving practice in place, that they really would have been in trouble. It would have been very difficult to compile the content. It's likely they would have missed something, and it would have been a real problem. But instead, they were prepared. They were able to respond, and in fact, they went ahead and ran additional gun buyback events afterwards, and that records request never really led to anything, which is the outcome that you want. And then finally, in the Pacific Northwest, Spokane, Washington, decided to put an archive in place actually several years ago for social media because they were familiar with all of the challenges and issues they had had with email as a record, and knew that social media was going to face the same challenges. It's just another form of communication, and it's becoming more and more important. So they put the archive in place, and they were doing what pretty much every agency does on social media, which was simply share information about a local event. Now, this was a kayaking trip that happened periodically, and unfortunately, what happened in this situation is that there was bad weather. The kayaking trip proceeded. An individual fell off the kayak and died of hypothermia. So the plaintiff's family issued a lawsuit, and in the lawsuit, they requested the city to produce all social media postings over the past 2 years related to the event, how it was promoted, the safety precautions, and so forth. So again, if you read this case study, and I hope you do, it's very informative to learn how these agencies have thought about this, put this practice in place, and how it really protected them. And in the state of Washington, there are penalties for taking too long to produce information, and without an archive, they felt that they would have either taken too long or been unable to actually respond to that discovery request. So again, litigation is nothing new to a public agency. The function that government provides is so critical to people's lives that legal situations happen. And really the question is how are you going to respond to those situations, and can you do it in a way that allows you to move on, reduce your costs, reduce time, and protect your agency, and then continue to get the benefits from these platforms where, again, almost the entire time you're on social media, you're benefiting. It's very rare that there are these situations, but when they happen, you want to be prepared for them. So let's transition to being prepared, and I promise to provide some guidance on how to think about archiving social media, and we want to do this in a way that is cost effective. It doesn't take much time, but it has a higher return, especially when there are records requests or legal situations that arise. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about, though, is to really create clarity and awareness around what you can expect from the data that's sitting on Facebook and Twitter. And it turns out that if you look at the terms of service for these sites, there's no guarantee whatsoever that Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, these other sites are going to retain your content. They tend to keep your content as much as they can, but they have no guarantee that they'll fulfill your records requirements. So many states have actually issued guidance saying you have to get this content in your control to truly meet our retention requirements. Now, that is something that a lot of folks say, well, okay, I understand that it's not in the TOS, but the reality is that Facebook doesn't want to lose my data. Well, if you go to the law enforcement page for Facebook, they actually say on there that if you want, if law enforcement wants to get content off of Facebook, law enforcement can issue a records request, a subpoena, but that subpoena must be issued before anything has been deleted. And so the deletion issue is a really big one because, in fact, when something gets deleted off the social network, it is gone forever. Facebook has it on their site that they won't be able to help if it's been deleted. So we decided to run a study and really understand this problem. So in January of this year, ArchiveSocial conducted a study across 400 of our customers. We look at their Facebook pages, and we actually have the technology to detect deletions. And going in, we knew that most of our customers don't delete, they hide, so we didn't expect a whole lot. But we wanted to see, and what we found was that out of 400 customers, nearly 7,800 records were deleted in 1 month. So that really surprised us. And in fact, if you talk to the customers, they'll say, yeah, we didn't delete, but it turns out the citizens that post to you, that transmit messages to you that are public record, potentially public record, they do delete. In fact, if a citizen deletes their own Facebook profile, it pulls out their comments. And so this is a really big issue. Again, not every customer had a deletion, not every page had a deletion, but 3 out of 4 of those pages that we were monitoring did have at least one deletion. Some had dozens. So content is being deleted, so it needs to come into your control to truly be protected as an agency. So how do you do that? Well, it does come down to archiving your social media. Again, in much the same manner that you archive your email, this is an important thing to do to have the content in your control. And we at ArchiveSocial decided to break this problem down actually when we started the company and think about social media as its own content type, because it is unique. Unlike email, unlike files, this content is, even though you administer it, is owned by Facebook and Twitter. It sits on their servers. So we evaluated this problem to think about how to best solve it, and we came up with these 4 factors. So my highest level guidance to you is to consider these 4 factors as you evaluate archiving solutions. And I'm going to give you some specific examples of these factors in the rest of this presentation. The first is frequency. So as we just saw, content gets deleted. Facebook can't guarantee they can produce it if you were to subpoena them if it had been deleted. So you have to close that window of content being deleted. You have to get in control as quickly as possible. So look for archiving approaches that get the content in your control as quickly as possible. Comprehensiveness is about having more rather than less. This is an open, broadcasted conversation on social media. And so if you don't have the records, it's very likely somebody else could, though, right? Anyone can take a screenshot at any point in time, which isn't a great record, but at least they have a record. So you want to have a comprehensive record at a minimum. And you want not only to have both sides of the conversation, but you want to also have a true, complete electronic record. And we'll talk about metadata here in a moment. But there is this key issue of what truly is the record, and it's not just what you see on the screen. So a screenshot is a record, but it's not the best record you could have. And so we'll come back to that here in a moment. Authenticity is about having data that is truly protected and can be proven as accurate and authentic. It hasn't been tampered with. And ultimately, that's important for the legal purposes. If you were to take a Facebook comment or a tweet to court and present it as evidence, it may be challenged. And you want to be able to prove that it is an authentic record and be able to stand by it. And then finally, context, I think, is perhaps the most overlooked in the archiving industry and perhaps most important with content like social media that's rich and dynamic. How do you recreate a Facebook conversation that has hundreds or thousands of comments that may have happened years ago, that has multimedia and live streaming? So being able to truly recreate the content is of critical importance, because archiving is not about storing data, it's about being able to produce it when you need it. So let's look at a few examples here of what that looks like in a robust archiving solution. And the first thing we'll focus on is actually on both comprehensiveness and frequencies, get as much of the data as you can, as quickly as you can. And a little trivia fact here, this is the original homepage of thefacebook.com from 2004. And what you want, the reason I highlight this is most of you have probably been on Facebook and Twitter and these other sites for a few years. Hopefully you'll start archiving soon if you haven't been already. But you don't want to forget about all those years you've already been on the platform. So the archiving technology does exist to go back in time and get everything that's still provided and available by the social network to the inception of your pages. You also want to look for technology or a record-keeping approach that is comprehensive. So it's not just the Facebook timeline that's important or your Twitter timeline, but all aspects. Private messaging tends to have some of the hardest-hitting content and content that constitutes record. Your reviews tab on Facebook, the mentions that you receive on Twitter are communications transmitted to you and received by your agency. So you want to cover as many of those inboxes as you can and that you are using on a daily basis. And then you want to get that content again as frequently as possible. So look for technology that operates in a real-time or near real-time fashion so that the window of deletion is practically non-existent. I mentioned metadata a moment ago, so here's a clear example of that. A tweet's 140 characters at most. In this example, we have a tweet that's 126 characters. But in fact, when you look at the actual electronic record behind a tweet, this is the content that's provided by Twitter, provided by Facebook. There's significantly more information there about who posted it, when it was posted, timestamps, user IDs, potentially location information. So a tweet, again, that's 140 characters can have more than 2,000 characters of metadata. And the two instances in which metadata has come up in public records lawsuits, both in the state of Washington and the state of Arizona, in both states, it was ruled that metadata is as much a part of the public record as the content that you see in the communication itself. So you do want to have a true, authentic, complete record that includes metadata. And so screenshots and other techniques that aren't truly designed for archiving social media come short on this issue. And then finally, one area that I like to focus on quite a bit is, it may sound simple, there may be a variety of ways that you can grab content from Facebook and store it somewhere and be able to search it later. In a nutshell, that's what a social media archive provides, but there is a vast sea of difference between how that's done. And like anything legal, it all comes down to the details. And so if you look at social media, I have a few examples here. These platforms continue to evolve. Sometimes on a weekly or monthly basis they have changes. Maybe even daily, depending on how quickly they're pushing things out. And keeping up with that's really important. Getting those details is critical because, again, the details are what make the difference. So on Facebook, we've seen over the years going from a commenting system to having a system where you can reply to comments. So does your archiving solution get the comments on top of the comments? When we have multimedia, does it get not only the photo that was posted originally, but does it get the multimedia that's provided by the comments and private messaging from your citizens? Does it get the live streamed video? When you're dealing with content like tweets, sometimes the constraints of the platform like Twitter will force some information to get condensed. And in the case of Twitter, we all use short URLs. But when you look at this record, short URL isn't that helpful. You really want to know what that tweet was linking to. So look for technology that tries to give you as much context information about those social media postings, because that will be important if those postings come up in a legal circumstance. And when I talked about context, again, it's not about storing data, it's about being able to produce it. Oftentimes when we do run searches for legal situations, records requests, or just general communications needs, we often find the comments that we were interested in, but the comments alone doesn't tell the story. You need the whole conversation. And so look for technology that can not just retrieve content, but actually replay that social media interaction and reconstruct it. So here's an Instagram comment that really belongs to an entire post. And so if you were to find that comment, it's really important to see the entire Instagram post, including the high-resolution photo. And finally, on sort of looking past the archive, when you have this archive and you have the details and all that's available at your fingertips, what then matters is getting it to the person that's asking for it, whether that's an attorney, a journalist, or a citizen. And this is, again, where a lot of traditional archiving platforms and techniques fall a little short because they're not used to the dynamic, rich nature of social media. So again, if you find a comment that you're interested in this example, we actually have a real records request from one of our customers where a citizen was posting commercial information about their own website and business. Well, in this records request, the city deleted that content, and the citizen actually issued a public records request saying, I want you to give me all the comments that you deleted. The city then did this search within ArchiveSocial, which highlighted the comments that were deleted. But in order to provide full context, ArchiveSocial reconstructed the entire conversation, including all the other comments in the original post, and then produced it in a PDF. And that gives that clarity that prevents the back and forth and the confusion oftentimes in a record production process. So again, look for technology that reconstructs the entire conversation and then maybe highlights what was truly requested for ultimate clarity. Now finally, I'll say that archiving, we often focus on the legal side of records compliance and public records, but day to day there are challenges that cities and agencies are facing, particularly around enforcing your policy. So there are other benefits that you can look for in technology that consolidates your content in one place. We've been working on technology that automatically generates alerts for anything that violates your policy. That's something that many of our agencies are now using, letting you know when profanity shows up or information related to emergency events. Can get that straight to your email so you can act on it. And even provide analytics. Again, if we're archiving, we have all this data in one place, and there's a lot that you can learn from it. You can learn who's posting the most often to your site, how positive or negative has that response been from your citizens. And so you can use that to gauge both risk as well as just understand how your social media strategy is working. So there are a lot of benefits to archiving that go beyond, that start with legal, but then go beyond that to day-to-day communications and improving your social media strategy. So what I'll do is I'll wrap up here. Again, we appreciate the opportunity here at ArchiveSocial to discuss this topic and want to be a resource to you. And on that note, what I'll close with is I've covered the need to archive. We do have a commercial offering to do this for agencies, but I also want to share a complimentary pro bono offering with you. We've recognized over the years that social media perhaps plays the most important role in the middle of a crisis. And again, those crisis situations, they generate public records requests, they generate legal risk. And so if you do not have an archive in place today, maybe you're working on it, but you don't have one today, and you find yourself in crisis, whether that's a natural disaster, a shooting, or something going viral, and really overwhelming your staff, we've set up this website, govcrisis.social, where you can request access to our technology at no cost, no obligation, and we'll provide access for 30 days to get you through the crisis. In fact, you can sign up a few days after your crisis starts, and we'll get some of that history. And we want to be a resource to the public sector and protect you in the time of these extreme circumstances because it is so important for you to have this information and protect your social media presence. So please check that out if you ever need it. And with that, here's my contact information. I'll hand it back to Morgan for questions.
Hey, Neil, great. Hey, and I'm going to just move back one slide real quick because I don't think it came up here real quick. And while that's up there, you folks copy down that. I do want to add a couple things to what Anil said, too, because I don't know if you folks realize this, but ArchiveSocial partnered with the state of North Carolina in 2010. They launched the world's first open interactive archive of social media. They've also worked with the city of Palmer, the borough of Matanuska, Susitna. Hopefully I said that right for you folks out there, and the world's largest law firm, the U.S. Department of Justice. I'm actually glad to kind of highlight what they did because they were a Code for America accelerator company in 2013, a cool vendor in 2014 by Gartner, and also one of our parent firms, GovTech 100, earlier by Government Technology Magazine. They were GovTech 100 company, and I've been on Anil's GovTech Social podcast. You folks need to go to iTunes, check that out, GovTech Social Podcast. So now that you folks have that, we do have some questions that have come in. Let me leave that on there for just a second so you folks can get Anil's contact information. And look, hey, Lori, this first one is actually for you. We've had a couple things come in, and this one is from Jesse Keel of the Alaska State Senate. So was asking about some social networks like Twitter let a user download the complete log of activity. She's asking, isn't it just easier to drop those to a local government server? Or what do you find the benefit of being able to use an archiving solution like you've done with ArchiveSocial as opposed to just downloading the entire Twitter stream?
Well, I hate to say a catchphrase, but I like the fact that we can set this and forget this. You know, it doesn't take so much management time to have a tool that in our toolbox, you know, for us to use to capture all these records. I don't know when I would find the time to go in and download all this information. And, you know, with several different departments all tweeting or posting, you know, it's a training issue as well. Getting new people coming on board, training them how to download. It's a simple answer.
And Anil, would you follow up on that? Because I know this is one of the reasons you actually created the company was because it was so tough for people to do this individually and do screenshots. So what's the advantage of using archiving solution as opposed to just downloading the log of activity?
Well, Morgan, Lori is absolutely right in terms of the amount of time. Anything that's manual tends to fall apart from a records management standpoint over time. So it's more of anything manual is more of a stopgap. But one thing I want to highlight here, this is a really good question from Jesse. The download feature from Twitter, the download feature from Facebook will not have the content you need. It's actually a huge point of confusion. We have a blog post on our blog, archivesocial.com/blog. I actually wrote this post a few years ago called "Why Your Twitter Archive is Not an Archive." And so a couple of reasons why. First of all, when you do use that feature to download from Twitter or Facebook, it does not include anything that has been deleted. So it's not really an archive. It's more of a snapshot. Snapshot. I'm so used to saying Snapchat these days. More of a snapshot of what's still there. That's not an archive. So again, anything that's been deleted is gone. And then the bigger issue there, Jesse, is that these download features do not include third-party content. They will give you your posts, your public timeline on Twitter, your posts on Facebook, but not the responses, not the mentions, not the direct messages. On Facebook, you will not get the comments, and the vast majority of records requests, legal situations we're seeing involve third-party content. So it's a really one-sided snapshot is really what they should call it, even though they call it an archive. So we have not had, we would strongly recommend against those download features because they create a false sense of security, I think because of the naming. A better approach is to screenshot, to be honest with you. And obviously that's one that's extremely time consuming and takes a lot of time and effort and hard to keep up, but a screenshot would be more complete than the download feature.
And Anil, that's actually funny you're talking about Snapchat. They've changed their name to Snap, and I guess it was a good idea that those guys turned down that $3 billion offer from Facebook. WhatsApp was bought for that because they just filed for a $19 billion IPO. So if you folks think social media is going away, I think the latest IPO from Snap now, as opposed to Snapchat, will kind of show you this is the way the market's going. So, hey, Lori, this next one's for you, and this is kind of a common one we see as well, and this is a great question here. It says, you get a question, and I know that you probably get questions from your employees, is that will their personal social media account be archived if they're currently a City and Bureau of Juneau account administrator? So how have you addressed that, and does that happen?
Well, people have asked me that, yes, and no, their personal accounts are not captured. The only account that's captured is the departmental account that they're administering, and there's a place to check off when they set up initially that directs the ArchiveSocial to what account is being captured.
And Anil, would you also cover that too? Because I know that we've done so many webinars, and this kind of seems to be a common issue. Is that, and is there a better way to set up when you're setting up these accounts? I know a lot of them have to be done from the personal account, and then they create the city account. Is that right?
That's correct. When they're creating the city or agency's account, that's a page that may be connected to your personal account, but that page itself is something that we can archive separately. In this instance, Morgan, I think the question is really going towards individuals that work for the public agency. They occasionally take input or even comment on public matters using their personal accounts. This is a really tough area. I often see this with elected officials and public officials in general. And the rule is, again, consult your attorney for the actual guidance here, but what I can do is channel what we're from the industry and my conversation with attorneys is that a public official communicating on behalf of public matters, conducting business, is generating a public record at that point. And so technically speaking, if they're doing this on their private social media accounts, the communications related to public business do need to be archived. Now, it's a really hard thing to do. We do have some customers that have public officials just archive their own feeds. But more often than not, the policy is a solution here where a policy is set that says you just cannot comment on public matters on your personal feeds. If you do want to comment on public matters, you do need to set up a separate profile that we are going to archive. And so the policy can at least set the expectation that you will archive, but that they shouldn't be mixing personal and professional.
And absolutely, Neil, and that goes back to, folks, what I talked about earlier. First thing, what do you have to have? Your policy. Get your rules of the road set up in place so we can avoid confusion like this. We've had another great, and folks, keep the questions coming in. We've got some good time. We want to make sure we get to those, and hopefully I don't mispronounce this next name. Is it Adiko Nyland, State of Alaska? And Anil, I'm going to go to you first on this, and then Lori, I'll bring you in. But it says, how do you handle individual employees' social media accounts where they occasionally take input about public matters? Do you have to, I'm sorry, wrong question here. Adiko was asking, their office has a Twitter account, and they only tweet out notifications of publications uploaded to their website. People can't comment on their tweets. Do they still need to archive the Twitter account that's only there as an extra courtesy? So, Anil, what have you found? And I know you won't speak from a legal standpoint as much, still refer to the law, but what have you found? And then, Lori, I want to talk about what does Juneau do. So, Anil, to you.
Well, Adiko, great question. This is very much how social media started for most agencies many years ago, where initially it's another channel just to broadcast information you have elsewhere. And then over time, because of the benefits of social media, I think you will see it turn into more of a conversation, more of a channel for quick updates, clarifications. But let's just say today in the state you're in, it's just tweeting out notifications of content you have elsewhere. Those tweets from you likely do not constitute record because you're pointing to content that exists elsewhere. But the thing to recognize is that social media is all about that two-way conversation. It's not very social if it's just one way, right? And Twitter does have the ability for people to mention you, to direct message you. You cannot turn off that private messaging. So you are responsible for a private message that comes in and maybe based off something you tweeted, a complaint, a question, a piece of information that could constitute record. A mention to you on Twitter is very much directed at you. And the general accepted philosophy on all of this is if you're on a social network, you've created a presence there, and you simply just can't ignore the fact that people are directly messaging you. You've put yourself out there, and those messages are coming in. They're therefore received under the records law. Received communications can constitute record.
And Lori, do you find yourself having a lot of things that go out, or have you found over time that you've now transitioned where there's a lot of conversations occurring not just on Facebook but on Twitter and some other channels as well?
We primarily use Facebook. I think our Eagle Crest area and JPD have a Twitter account that is not as active as the Facebook accounts. So, but I'm not aware that people can't comment on our tweets. I'm not sure about that.
Okay. Hey, Anil, this one's for you. You were talking, too, about Facebook and going all the way back to the original The Facebook account there. What other platforms does ArchiveSocial cover, and how far back do you go in there? Because we've gotten a couple questions here about, they launched their Facebook page. Does it go back more than 3 years? If somebody were to start today, and let's say they've been on Facebook or social media for 5 years, how far back can you go?
Well, Morgan, this is really important because most folks started Facebook before they started archiving. And the good news with Facebook is, again, we are reliant on what Facebook will provide to us. So if it has been deleted, we can't get it. There may be situations in which Facebook does restrict some content, but the vast majority of cases that in which we work with public agencies, we're able to go back to the inception of the account and still get everything that's still on the site that hasn't been deleted. And really catch you up. Now, this does vary by social network. We are limited to the extent that the social network still makes the data available to us. But Facebook goes back all the way. Twitter goes back a few thousand tweets. Other networks tend to go back pretty far as well. So it really just depends case by case. And you asked me which networks we cover, and I'll try my best. We continue to expand this as agencies adopt other networks. We're 100% driven by our customer usage of social media. But today we cover Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Vimeo, Flickr, Pinterest, and Google+. And we also get Periscope videos as part of our Twitter capture.
And boy, video, I've seen that be a huge driver. Hey, Neil, this next one's for you, and then Lori, we're going to let you bat cleanup, so to speak, as we close out today. But, Neil, we always get questions about this sounds great. We're public sector agencies, so there's always an issue of budget. I've went through that myself. I know you've had many of these discussions. So let's talk really quick about ArchiveSocial, about how you cost it out, and what is the installation process involved for people who want to get started.
Well, we know that public agencies have a different set of constraints that they work with. And for all of you tuned in, ArchiveSocial has a customer base that is nearly 100% comprised of public agencies. So our focus is almost 100% on the public agencies, is how I should put it. And so we understand this through and through. And so our pricing is transparent. Appreciate the question. It's on our website, archivesocial.com/pricing. So there's really no hidden fees, no wheeling and dealing. We have a fair, consistent price for all agencies. And we designed the pricing knowing this is an emerging issue that you have to be proactive on to really fall as discretionary spend. So about 80% of our agencies will fall under our standard pricing plan, which is under $5,000 annual. It doesn't limit how many Facebook and Twitter and other profiles you have. It's really just based on usage. And so we do have price points below that if you have lower volumes of usage. We do have price points above that if you have a much larger presence. But trying to price this as a discretionary spend so that it can be as close to a no-brainer as possible when it comes to government procurement, and really simplify that process for you and ensure agencies can get protected.
And Lori, this last one's going to be for you. There's always issues about who can see your accounts in a search. How have you guys set this up, and who can see accounts when you do a search like that?
The administrator can see all the accounts and all the searches, and then the individual page administrators can see their own accounts.
So really nobody can go searching. In other words, when you set it up, you determine the roles and what accounts they're responsible for, and that's the only ones that they can see. Otherwise, you have to be the overall account administrator. Is that right?
Exactly.
Well, look, folks, we've run out of time. Lori, thank you very much. Anil, thank you very much, folks. We're going to have to bring this to a close today because we said we'd keep it to 1 hour, and we are there. Remember now, within the next 48 hours, we're going to provide a link to everybody so that you can download this information. Make sure that you share it with your colleagues. I do want to thank my fellow speakers, Lori Sika and Anil Chawla, and a special thanks to our partner, ArchiveSocial. Folks, we can't put these on without the good help of our industry partners like ArchiveSocial. If you have any questions, make sure that you drop us a note. I encourage you to fill out the survey here at the end of the webinar. This is the way we improve. We determine what topics we cover. And actually, we have instituted what we call the Academy, which is a little bit longer format so we can dive deeper and bring on an extra speaker based on your feedback. So, folks, keep that feedback coming in. If there's any issues, make sure that you drop me a note. Morgan Wright here. Make sure you go to govtech.com/webinars to see what's coming up. Folks, we want to wish you a safe and happy Thanksgiving. Everybody stay safe this holiday season, and we hope to see you on an upcoming government technology event. Everybody have a great afternoon.